All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this evening's webinar on the housing element of Milwaukee's comprehensive plan. This is an informational webinar that will include a presentation as well as time for questions and answers. Feel free to submit your questions in the question and answer feature, and we'll answer them at the end. I'm Tanya Fonseca, and I'm joined here by City Department of City Development colleagues, Amy Oath, Sam Leichling, and Kahari Bell, and Kyle Gast, I think I just saw log in too. All right. So we'll go ahead and get started. If you need captions, there is also a captions button below. We are recording this evening's meeting and we are posting recordings of the meetings online. So if you want to check it out again later, or if you have any friends, neighbors, or family members who want to check it out, you can share that information with them. So for this evening's meeting, we plan to give a quick overview on what the plan is and why we took on the project. And then we'll provide a summary of the engagement that we've had throughout the process, as well as a summary of the updates that we've made to the plan as a result of all of your feedback. And then we'll talk about how you can provide feedback on the proposed draft plan that is posted online now, and then end with questions and answers. So what is the plan? This plan is an amendment to the City of Milwaukee citywide policy plan, and it sets a collective vision for housing and includes policies and recommendations for housing and neighborhoods throughout the City of Milwaukee. The plan also includes recommendations for updates to the city's zoning code as it relates to housing. And after the plan is adopted, we as staff will work on implementation, and that includes some of the zoning code updates that are discussed in the plan. I mentioned that this plan has policies and recommendations. So just a quick highlight on what a policy is. A planning policy is a guiding principle or statement that informs how decisions about land can be used. And it can also guide future efforts for how to improve physical, social, and economic conditions in Milwaukee. But plan policies are not regulations, so they cannot create new or change existing programs, regulations, or provide funding for specific priorities on their own. So for example, a policy might say, allow for accessory dwelling units in all neighborhoods. This policy then guides future zoning considerations and decisions, as well as development approvals to allow for accessory dwelling units in neighborhoods. This plan makes recommendations to update the City of Milwaukee zoning code. And a zoning code is both a written document of rules along with a map that shows what zone each piece of land is part of. And each zone has a unique set of rules that guide development in terms of use and the size and shapes of buildings. And these zoning rules and changes to the zoning map are laws that are adopted by the city's Common Council. So why did we take on this project now, and why are we talking about policies and zoning? There are many different housing types and many different needs for all households across the Milwaukee community. And we heard throughout the planning process from the community and through data that there is a need for a greater diversity of housing types. We also know that we have a housing shortage, unfortunately, for people that live in Milwaukee, and we have one of the most competitive rental markets in the country. We have not been seeing enough housing rehab and development for the last couple decades, and that means we don't have enough housing supply in both the rental and home ownership market. And we have room for more housing and more households in the city. We used to have 150,000 more people in the city than we do today, which means that there were more people paying into the tax base to support city services. So we took on this project to encourage more housing choice for everyone here and those who will call Milwaukee home in the future. The planning process kicked off back in the summer of 2023, and there was a lot of really fantastic discussion about the visioning and goals for housing and what we collectively need moving forward. Um, and then from there, we came back with some draft recommendations based on that outreach, looking at, in addition to the outreach, previous planning efforts, so that we could ensure that we're consistent with those, an example being the climate and equity plan. And in April 2024, we rolled out a draft plan with another round of community engagement. Based on feedback in the spring of 2024, we updated the draft and held a public hearing in July. And at that public hearing, we received requests for additional engagement as well as a benefit and harm analysis. So over the fall and early winter of 2025, we conducted the additional engagement, and we used that engagement to develop the benefit and harm analysis. And we made updates to the plan based on the feedback that we received. So now we're at a point where we have a updated proposed draft plan that is based on engagement that we've heard through the entire process. And for the engagement, we have interacted directly and indirectly, with over 10,000 people. Over 2,200 people engaged at open houses, pop-up events, community meetings, and focus groups. And over 8,600 individual community members visited the website and have engaged online, as well as viewing the video recordings of meetings like these. And throughout the process, we've also included multilingual materials and interpretation for participants. Themes from the engagement have included affordability in terms of homeownership and neighborhood choice, ensuring that we have neighborhoods and quality of life for all, how we've heard a lot about the importance of repair of neighborhoods, unique neighborhood needs, and a priority of anti-displacement, housing diversity and access for all, quality building design, and sustainability and resilience, including healthy neighborhoods and parks within a walking distance for all. We also heard a lot about transportation in terms of walkability and having additional options, including the bus, and the need for quality, safe, and fair housing conditions and accountability for landlords. And in terms of growth, making sure that we have a resilient city that enhances livability for all. We also developed a benefit and harm analysis that goes alongside the housing element plan. And this benefit and harm analysis analyzes the near-term zoning strategies of the housing element and evaluates potential benefits and unintended consequences of proposed recommendations for future updates to the zoning code. It focuses on concerns that have been raised throughout the process by community members during community engagement, and it reviews the plan's alignment with the city's goals for housing affordability, housing choice, anti-displacement, and ensuring that vulnerable communities aren't harmed by the plan's recommendations. And it also includes steps to track and mitigate potential unintended consequences of the plan's recommendations. The engagement and the benefit and harm analysis also helped shape the updates to the plan, as well as tracking and techniques that the city will use to mitigate potential harm that's been identified. And this document, if you haven't had a chance to take a look, is available online. And with that, I will turn things over to Amy.
All right, thank you, Tanya. So through all the feedback received, including the last round of engagement, it's helped inform additional updates to the plan. These updates are intended to make it clear how we're reflecting on the plan's goals and how we're working to meet current housing needs. So this is a quick summary slide of the updates that we'll run through. We've updated some of the near-term zoning strategies, and that included some restructuring of the last sections of the plan. As you look through the document, so things might look a little bit different and also similar at the same time. We included a section on the 7 key priorities. Within the policy section, there were updates to a few of the policies and 4 new policies. Also added a new section regarding the commitments to support Milwaukee's housing system, an explanation of the name change, and in general updated the data and infographics for more storytelling and the most current statistics, and also kind of moving the defining of the housing types earlier into the plan as well. So first, updates to the zoning recommendations. These are the 2 near-term zoning code update recommendations that are included in the May 1st, 2025 draft plan. So near-term strategy 1 is to update the zoning code to allow more types of neighborhood scale housing in our neighborhoods. So this includes allowing in all neighborhoods detached single-family homes, townhomes, or fee simple attached homes, accessory dwelling units, and cottage courts. And I'll show you how this compares to the last draft from July 2024 in the next slide. Near-term strategy 2 has not changed since the July draft. So this is still recommending adjusting the zoning code to remove barriers to housing on business corridors and multifamily zoning districts. So relying on height limits and setback requirements and design standards instead of mathematical equations to control the number of housing units. And this applies to existing multifamily districts and commercial districts where multifamily housing is already allowed. So this next slide is a comparison chart that shows the differences for near-term strategy 1 between the July 2024 draft, our current zoning code, and also the updated May 1st draft plan. So for a single family detached home, we already allow this housing type within all RS or all single family districts and all RT districts or 2-family districts. So July draft said continue to allow, same thing with the updated 2025 plan. For single family attached homes, which are fee simple townhomes, basically townhomes with separate lots, these are currently allowed in all the RT or the 2-family districts. Recommendation in the July plan was to allow these in all RS and RT districts, so single family and 2-family. That continues to be the same in the 2025 draft plan. Accessory dwelling units are currently not defined in our zoning code. The recommendation in 2024 was to allow them in all RS and RT districts, and that is the same in the current 2025 plan. Cottage courts are also not defined in our current zoning code. The recommendation in the July 2024 draft was to allow them in all the RS and RT districts. That is the same in the updated 2025 plan. The recommendation for duplexes in the 2024 draft was to allow them in all the RS and all the RT districts. This recommendation has been removed, so there's no change in the current zoning code, so they continue to be allowed in all RT districts. For triplexes, these are currently allowed in the RT4 district. The recommendation in the July 24 draft was to allow these in RS and RT districts. That recommendation has been removed, so no change from the current zoning code. For fourplexes, these are only allowed in the RT4 district. The recommendation in July 2024 was to allow them in all the RT districts. That recommendation has been removed, so there's no change for the current zoning code. So that's the difference for that near-term strategy between the July 2024 draft and the current draft plan. So as I noted, we added 7 key priorities to really help describe the plan. Those priorities are increasing housing choice and access, repairing homes and neighborhoods, a commitment to intergovernmental collaboration and legislative advocacy, a commitment to home ownership, a commitment to anti-displacement, economic resilience, and walkable neighborhoods. The first updated policy reflects the changes to that near-term zoning strategy for neighborhood scale housing. So this is more about looking at changes over time to have more housing variety through a variety of processes versus the previous version, which recommended allowing more housing types by right in the near term. There's also a policy It was added to talk about how zoning map change processes can be used in appropriate locations for middle housing types like duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes. This includes a call out box that talks more about what the RS, the residential single family, and RT, the residential two family districts are like and how they're compatible. There's also a policy that talks about how an applicant for a zoning map changes should engage with impacted neighborhoods during that pre-development process. We renamed Section 2 to Neighborhood Repair, Connections, and Health. We updated the short-term rental policy, which now references adopting regulations for short-term rentals versus just considering regulations and monitoring short-term rentals. We added a new policy regarding the appropriateness of the creation of overlays for vulnerable communities. We added a policy that talks about limiting the placement of fire escapes so that they aren't along the street. And in general, there were a few language adjustments within the section and some reorganization to help with formatting and flow. And now I'm going to hand it over to Sam.
Thank you, Amy. Again, it's Sam Leichling with the Department of City Development. Want to thank everyone who decided to tune in today. I see some of the familiar names in the attendance list from people who've been following along on this process for more than a year. And we want to thank you for your continued engagement, feedback that we've gotten throughout the process, and suggestions on ways that we can continue to make this plan one that addresses our overall housing goals for the city and also balances the feedback we've continued to hear. And so Amy and Tanya both talked about some of that feedback and ways that it's informed the changes to the plan. And I'd like to talk a little bit more about that, especially some of the specific feedback we heard over the past year on things that people felt were missing from the plan or weren't as clearly articulated or didn't do a good enough job of resonating to say, hey, we understand that housing is a complex and nuanced issue with a lot of factors playing about each other. Zoning is one piece of that puzzle, but there's other pieces of the puzzle that the city needs to be focused on simultaneously if we're serious about achieving those big goals we talked about earlier of making sure that every Milwaukeean has a safe, accessible, and affordable home, and also that we're being thoughtful about making sure that the city's policies are also protecting vulnerable communities and not contributing to risks or pressure of displacement. And so we heard a variety of specific things that we wanted to elevate within the plan. I want to talk about those now. The first is a commitment to legislative advocacy and intergovernmental collaboration. And what does that mean? It means that we acknowledge that the city isn't going to be able to solve some of these issues on our own. When we talk about the funding that's going to be needed to meet the deep needs we have for affordable housing for some of our residents that have the hardest time accessing housing on the private market, we know that there's going to be financial tools that are needed to meet those needs. And the city is committed to using our financial resources to do that. And we're also committed to legislative and other types of advocacy with state and federal partners to continue to identify and attract and secure funds to meet those key needs from our other funding partners as well. And we're working aggressively every day in both Madison and in Washington, D.C. to try to secure those resources. Another thing when we talk about legislative advocacy is one of the things that we heard pretty consistently throughout the process is that people would like to see the city do more to hold landlords accountable for ensuring that there's safe and fair housing conditions, and also that landlords are not taking advantage of vulnerable tenants, and that we're being thoughtful about tenants' rights and providing tenants with access to various avenues to exert those rights. And so we've included some commitment language in the plan about things that we are already doing or committed to doing that on that realm. But also we wanted to identify the specific areas where we will need legislative change at the state level to even take those efforts a step farther. There's a number of things that I think the city has identified that we would like to do to continue to hold landlords accountable, to be able to do more inspections and things like that to make sure that people are providing safe and decent housing. And in some cases, the state has passed legislation that prevents the city from doing that. And so we wanted to call out those areas where we are committed to continuing to advocate at the state level for changes in state policy that will allow us to advance some of those recommendations. And so we wanted to make sure that that's articulated. And those are, in many cases, items where the city's formally already acted through our common council to say, this is our legislative goals, and now we want to go out and continue to build a coalition to achieve those through legislative advocacy. So that's the advocacy and intergovernmental collaboration element, and we have a lot of list of other things in that vein in the plan. There's also a commitment to homeownership. We heard throughout this process that while we all acknowledge that there's a need to preserve and create new affordable rental opportunities for Milwaukee residents, and that's a need that's not going to go away anytime soon, and it's one that we're committed to. We also know and have heard the significant prioritization people have around homeownership. We know that homeownership represents an avenue to wealth building. It represents an avenue to kind of ownership of land and control. And that's something that's been, something we have heard in all of our neighborhood planning efforts, as well as this effort. And so what we wanted to elevate in the plan is the various strategies that the city is already carrying out to support homeownership and the commitments that we're going to make to accelerate that moving forward. So what are some examples there? In the last few years, we've launched a down payment assistance program that's helped now more than 1,000 homeowners achieve homeownership. And that's something that was launched in the last few years, and we're committed to continuing to operate that as a priority strategy. It's been one of our most effective programs, and it's something that's actually moved the needle on homeownership. We saw some data that suggests for the first time in the city's history in recent years, the homeownership, the number of both Black and Latino homeowners grew, and that we know that that's in a large part to some of the policies that we're carrying out and are committed to carrying out in the future. Similarly, when we talk about homeownership, we know it's not just about helping families achieve homeownership, but preserve and retain homeownership. And so we talk about some of the strategies we use to help existing homeowners maintain their homes through some of our loan and grant programs, and ways that we believe we want to continue to accelerate those in the future. And we also know that to grow homeownership and to make homeownership attainable for a wider variety of Milwaukeeans, we need to continue to build new homes and to have those homes be attainable for a wide variety of income levels. And so the city in recent years has set a goal with some of our community partners of creating 100 new entry-level homes a year through a variety of strategies, including we've been deploying tax increment financing, other city and federal resources, and using city land to turn over vacant land to community-minded and nonprofit and other developers to build homes. And then we've also been providing financial resources to make those homes affordable for low and moderate income home buyers, and also placing restrictions on that land so that they can continue to be affordable, not just for the current homeowners, but for future homeowners. And those are the series of strategies that we know are critical to achieving our homeownership goals. They're ones that we want to, again, honor and elevate through this plan. And we've made some commitments to ways that we're going to continue to bolster those strategies in the coming years, including one exciting thing that we have on the horizon for 2025 is to launch a new effort called the Pro Housing Initiative, which will continue to use federal resources to create affordable homeownership in a variety of new styles, including townhomes and duplexes, which we know there's an interest in those styles for homeownership. We haven't built many in decades. And so we want to use this opportunity over the next few years to pilot those and try to bring those to scale, along with supporting efforts like the Milwaukee Community Land Trust, Habitat for Humanity, and other partners that are creating permanently affordable homes. The final thing that I want to talk about in this section that we tried to elevate within the updated version of the plan is the city's commitment to anti-displacement. We do have an anti-displacement plan that was authored and released in 2018. We've been working with a variety of partners since then to implement it. A lot of the recommendations in the anti-displacement plan have been started to be implemented. We've done things like create 1,000 plus new units of affordable rental homes in areas that were identified at risk of displacement. We've put a policy in place that makes sure that 20% of those are reserved for existing neighborhood residents to help them avoid displacement. And we've targeted some of the homeownership strategies I just talked about to neighborhoods that were identified at risk of displacement. And we've also made additional commitments on how we'll utilize city land in areas where we've identified a risk of displacement to make sure that city land sales are tailored to helping existing residents stay in their homes and create new affordable homeownership opportunities. But we also know that the 2018 plan was not a stopping point. It was not the end of our anti-displacement planning. And so what we are including within the housing element is a commitment to continue to carry out the strategies that we are already doing and have already identified, but also work with neighborhood partners, housing partners, and others to continue to identify additional strategies. And, we include some ideas in the plan, including things like, exploring legislation that would give tenants first right of refusal to purchase homes that might be put up for sale, efforts to continue to bolster and support our Milwaukee Community Land Trust and the Axe Housing, who has a initiative in place to actually go out and buy homes to compete with out-of-state investors and speculators to be able to then transition those homes to owner occupancy. And those are the strategies that we want to continue to both explore and bolster in coming years. And we want to make sure that that commitment is front and center in the housing element plan. So those are those are all laid out on some additional pages we've added there. And we've also talked about those in more depth in the benefit and harm analysis that Amy mentioned. So on the next slide, we also talked about, at the start, you probably saw the emails. We also changed the name of the plan, and we want to talk about why, and we want to be front and center and transparent about that. One of the other things we heard throughout the last year of engagement was a perception that the name of the plan, the Growing MKE name, sent a signal that the plan was prioritized attracting new residents to Milwaukee instead of meeting the existing housing needs of our existing and future residents. And so we wanted to make the name change to more explicitly call out that the goals of this plan have always been about ensuring that all Milwaukeeans have a safe and affordable home, and that we have housing choice and a policy and regulatory structure that really supports all Milwaukeeans in achieving housing choice and affordability. And so we updated the plan to reflect that feedback and to reflect those goals. And what are those goals? Again, let's now go back. We're about to turn it over and kind of talk about next steps and questions, but I want to end with some of these big picture goals. We talked about them at the start, and it's important, I think, to end with that to center why this is so important. All of the recommendations in the housing element are tied back to some of the goals that we've generally heard consensus on as we've talked to residents over the past 2 years. And those goals are advancing housing choice and access for all Milwaukeeans, supporting our efforts to make sure that our commercial corridors are walkable and economically resilient, that we're attracting neighborhood businesses and having housing choices that bring the population to support them. And that Milwaukee is a city that you can, navigate on a variety of methods. It can be foot, bicycle, transit, walking. We know people are going to continue to also navigate, get around the city by cars, but we want to make sure that we have a development pattern that provides choices. And we also want to make sure that we're doing that in a way that sets up the city to be sustainable and resilient, with regardless of what comes with the future of both climate change and economic and environmental resilience. We want to make sure that we have a housing system that is prepared for that. And also that the homes that people live in are safe and healthy and quality places to live. And we think that the recommendations of the housing element reflect those goals, and they reflect the feedback we've heard from people over the last 2 years about what that can look like in practice. And so with that, I will turn it now back over to Amy to talk about next steps in this process. And then we'd love to spend the rest of the time hearing your questions and feedback as well.
All right, so we are now in the public review process of the updated plan. Thank you for joining us tonight to be part of that process. So we're asking for folks to provide comments online or by email by Tuesday next week so that we can kind of start working on any updates to the plan based on that feedback. I'm going to show you exactly where that lives on the website as well. This QR code on the screen will take you to the website. And then after we receive comments, we'll work on another draft, and it goes through that adoption process where there's a public hearing before City Plan Commission and Zoning, Neighborhoods and Development Committee. Could be multiple public hearings. So, and then as those committees recommend approval through multiple iterations of the plan, it would then go to Common Council. If Common Council approves it, it would then go to the mayor for signature. So I'm gonna go to the website to show you all what that looks like. So this is the housing element website, formerly Growing MKE. And if you scroll down, you can go and hit here or here to go to the draft page. And on that draft page, you'll find the plan in multiple languages, executive summaries, a comment form. And then at the bottom, there's a variety of links. So this is a set of summaries of the changes to the plan, a little bit more detail than what we went through tonight. There's a PDF, but also we tried to make as much of the text virtual as possible so that if someone if English is not someone's first language, they can also go and translate the website. So in that is a summary of changes to the plan. There's a link to the benefit and harm analysis, which is also virtual and a PDF format for here. And engagement summary, also virtual and PDF format. An interactive zoning map, which we had previously, that's been updated. And you can go and search and look at any parcel within the city and then check out their zoning information, what's currently allowed, and then what would be allowed under the housing element recommendations. And then the last thing is a link to updated FAQs as well. So now I'm going to go back to the presentation. Nope. And we will enter Q&A. So if you have any questions, just do this.
Maybe, Amy, while we're waiting for people to fill in questions, I'll maybe throw one out there to start the discussion. And I know you've already said this, but maybe just repeat again. So for people that do want to provide comments after they reviewed the plan, what is the way that people should do that?
The best, so there's a comment form on the website, and there's a few questions that kind of just prompt, what do you like about it? What do you think should be improved? That sort of thing. You're also welcome to email us or call us with questions. We're happy to be in touch in any of those fashions. Right, Tanya, go ahead.
Okay, so we just got a question in regards to our plans for supporting the Milwaukee Community Land Trust. Sam, do you want to dive into that one?
Thank you. So the Milwaukee Community Land Trust began operation a number of years ago. And for those who aren't familiar with land trusts, one of the unique things about a community land trust model is because of the way the ownership of those homes are structured, the family who lives in the house actually owns the house, but the land trust continues to hold ownership of the land. And that allows for the house to be deed restrictions to be put in place that make it permanently affordable, which means while the current owner gets some appreciation from ownership over time, when they go to resell it, there's also some restrictions that allow for those properties to be permanently affordable and remain available for the next generation of low or moderate income home buyers. And so the city has supported the Milwaukee Community Land Trust in a number of ways. We provided some funding to support them as they launched. And then many of the homes that have been put into land trust, we've worked with development partners to provide development subsidy that allows for those homes to be made available at less cost than they were actually constructed. We also want to continue to make city vacant lots available to the extent that developers are building new homes that could be placed into the land trust. Those are the various strategies that we have already worked on with affordable housing developers and are committed to continuing to do. And so we want to work with not just the Milwaukee Community Land Trust, but all developers who are doing new construction of entry-level homes in Milwaukee. Habitat for Humanity is obviously an example of that. We have a proposal that's going to be heard by our Common Council in the coming weeks that will construct 60 new homes developed by both Habitat and Envision Growth in the Harambe neighborhood. Those will be, again, what we call entry-level homes, meaning we're using city land and city financing to make those homes available for entry-level buyers. We expect the sale prices will be between $105,000 and $140,000. And so we're kind of building our models to support those styles of development, and we want to continue to deploy them with a goal of delivering 100 homes a year for the foreseeable future.
Great, thank you. If anyone has any additional questions, feel free to enter them. Okay, we just got another. What role do you see for philanthropy? Sam talked about working with federal and state partners, but the federal help is disappearing.
Oh, you want me to? Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for asking that. It's definitely true that there's a lot of uncertainty about what help we can expect at the federal level, and we hope that the funding sources that the city has relied on and cities across the country have relied on for affordable housing, we hope those continue to exist and grow. But we also know we need to plan for other alternatives, and so that's why we are working closely with a variety of partners, including there's some advocacy that we continue to carry out at the state to identify additional state funding for affordable housing, as well as our philanthropic community. We are blessed that the philanthropic community locally has banded together under the umbrella of the Community Development Alliance, along with a variety of other housing partners, community partners, to grow the amount of funds that are being deployed for affordable housing locally. And there has been some success in that in the last few years. The philanthropic community has stepped up and supported things like additional housing counseling, additional lending resources for some of the projects I've met or the initiatives I've mentioned earlier, and they continue to be at the table. And so we certainly want to thank them for their existing partnership, and I expect that they will continue to be key partners in being a piece of that puzzle.
Thanks, Sam. We also just got a question in regards to public housing and whether or not there's consideration of building additional public housing along with new housing development. Is there anything that would be worthwhile to share at this point?
So great question. Obviously, public housing in Milwaukee is owned and operated by the city of Milwaukee, the Housing Authority of the city of Milwaukee. And much of the funding to both construct and operate public housing, traditional public housing, comes from the federal government. And there's been a law in the books for many years that has prohibited across the country adding to the number of public housing units that are kind of traditional public housing. Obviously, there's a lot of discussion in Washington, D.C. about what the future public housing should look like. So some of that is in some ways going to be dependent on what happens at the federal policy level. But what you've seen is while those rules do remain on the books, local housing authorities and local governments have gotten creative to find other ways to create social housing or mixed income housing that doesn't rely on the traditional public housing model. And I think we're certainly following those examples, and some of the strategies I've talked about us deploying definitely fall into that category. So I think that's just something that we're going to continue to obviously monitor and follow, and there'll be new leadership at the Housing Authority in the coming year. They're obviously searching for a new executive director, and that individual will also get the ability to kind of set the future tone for what they do beyond their core public housing portfolio.
Thanks, Sam. We also have received a question in regards to accessory dwelling units and whether the new policy allows ADUs or accessory dwelling units to piggyback on utilities from the main residential structure. If not, why? Amy, is that one you can take?
Yeah, so this is something that has come up that is true currently right now. Our building code requires for a detached accessory dwelling unit to have separate plumbing. It's something we want to explore and have started having conversations about. So thanks for bringing it up. Something we're aware of, and yes, good to keep talking about and figuring out what we can do.
Thanks, Amy. We also just received a question in regards to what was the reason for removing the recommendation for duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes in the RS zoning. This feels exclusionary and counterintuitive to the goals of the initiative. Sam, can you take that one?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. That's a great question. And it's one we maybe should have addressed even more explicitly in the presentation, because it's true that one of the recommendations of the last version of the plan that was probably the most discussed, that we got the most feedback on, was the recommendation to allow 2 and 3 unit homes in all residential districts throughout the city, and 4 family homes in additional districts. And we heard a lot of feedback on that, both positive and negative. Ultimately, as we heard from people across the city, including both neighborhood leaders and our elected officials, including and especially in neighborhoods that continue to have single opportunities for single family homeownership that are perhaps attainable for low and moderate income households. One of the concerns we heard the most was whether or not allowing those additional styles of housing might come at the expense of low and moderate income individuals being able to access homeownership. And there was a lot of discussion with that around some of our elected officials, and it's a complicated balancing test too. We obviously want to balance the goals of allowing additional housing choice and what that can mean for affordability and opening up opportunities in new neighborhoods, but also balancing that overriding goal of homeownership. And so ultimately, after talking to our elected officials throughout the city, and again, prioritizing the feedback we heard from vulnerable or neighborhoods that perhaps were more vulnerable to the concerns about whether or not those changes might open up avenues for additional speculation. We ultimately decided to remove that recommendation. And partly that was because we want to make sure that this is a plan that can get the support from our elected officials and community members. And that was a change that we heard overwhelmingly supported. And also, we acknowledge that over time, we still do want to explore whether there's opportunities to continue to allow for additional housing choice and additional neighborhoods. And we talked in the benefit and harm analysis document about ways that we'll continue to monitor some of the concerns we heard, concerns about out-of-state speculators, concerns about landlords. And hopefully, one of the things we'll be able to do is demonstrate that we have enough supporting policies in place that if we ever were to make changes like that in the future, there's ways that we can at least ensure that it doesn't come at the expense of some of the other goals related to homeownership and anti-displacement. And I know that's not an answer that will satisfy everybody, and we're happy to hear that feedback too, because we've heard strong opinions on both sides of that question, certainly.
Thanks, Sam. We also got a question about whether there's any progress on building a factory for making housing in Milwaukee, which is one of the ideas in the Climate and Equity Plan from the Environmental Collaboration Office. And the answer is yes, there is continued interest in that from some community partners. There's also some local businesses that are working on kind of scaling up sort of prefab or other kind of more innovative techniques to create housing more affordably. So there continues to be interest in that. So that's a great question. Thank you. And then we also just received a question in regards to whether townhouses that are 3 or more connected dwellings allowed in RT districts. RT districts are our 2-family districts, but some of them do allow more than 2 units of housing on each parcel. And our townhouses, those buildings subject to commercial building code. Amy, is that one you can take?
Sure. So this is like a multi-answer question. So within our current code, within RT districts, you can have a single family attached home, which is basically a townhome with so attached wall, but the buildings are on different properties. Okay, so you have a parcel line with that adjoining wall, and that's allowed. So that kind of allows you to scale up multiple townhomes. You could also, though, have like a side-by-side duplex townhome setup within our RT1, RT2, or RT3 districts, because those allow up to 2 units. Within our RT4 district, you could do 1, 2, 3, or 4 all on the same property. And then to answer the other part of your question, those all then, that's what's allowed by zoning. We also have the building code. So the building code, the residential building code, applies to a building structure with 1 or 2 units. And then in the commercial code does apply to 3 or more units. So yes, there are additional costs certainly with going above 2 units for a building.
Okay. If there are any other questions, feel free to drop them in.
While we're waiting, in case anyone has a final question, we also, I think, in addition to what Amy just said on the townhome question, just to even make it more clear about what the plan recommends, Amy described what the current zoning allows. We do have a recommendation within the housing element to make it easier to build townhomes that are set up for home ownership, meaning that they're each on their own individual parcel in all of our zoning districts. Because we've heard that that is a style of housing that's desirable. And we've also, obviously talked earlier about the prioritization for home ownership. And so there is recommendations in the plan that would allow those to be built in more zoning districts, including our single family zoning districts, if they were set up that way for home ownership. Well, this is a great way to end that. We, instead of a question, we got a comment. And I know we didn't necessarily, we hope people will submit comments through the more formal channel, but I'll just read it. This individual said, this approach is much better. I thought that the goals announced before were not really appropriate for zoning. And so I think, thank you. We'll take that as a positive, and I hope others will share comments, any comments you have through the Growing MKE channels that Amy mentioned earlier, whether they're positive or negative. We want to hear those, and we want to hear any feedback people have as we're kind of continuing to make any final tweaks or adjustments in addition to the significant changes that have already been made based on public feedback prior to this plan being more formally submitted for review by our City Plan Commission and our Zoning Neighborhoods and Development Committee. So I just want to say thank you again on behalf of all of us for your participation, not just tonight, but throughout the process. Thank you.
Yes, and please, thank you, echoing Sam what said, share this with others. The recordings are on our YouTube and on our website. We've already seen a lot of recordings from the webinar last week. We'll post this one as well with the Q&A because it's been a little bit different. And yeah, encourage people to give feedback because we do want to hear from you. And this has been great. We appreciate you all being here.